Hey everybody, this is Chris with firstcenturychristianity.net. Thanks for tuning in. Today's message is very broad, much bigger, much broader topic than we normally talk about. Normally I focus, on very religious and doctrinal type things. Today is very broad to try to appeal to as many people as possible, particularly those who fear God, and talking about the status of government schools in Western society. And we all know the future of society relies on the education of our children. And so one day we woke up and the schools were a mess, right? That's not the reality of it. The reality of it is that the schools have been increasingly messed up for about 40 years. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. The There's a printed blog post at firstcenturychristianity.net called Tips for Homeschooling. That's going to be in the comments for this message, wherever you may see this, because I do want you to know how to get your kids out of the government schools. And it's not about just homeschooling. We aren't, at our family, I'm going to tell you the background of my wife and I and why we got into this. It is not what with the stereotypical angle that people have. We got into this because we just did not care for public school at all. Neither one of us had a good time there. And so when we started bringing our kids up, we started in private school, in a private Christian school, a very blessed place that accepted us, even though we had big doctrinal differences. They respected our doctrine, they respected us, and it was a wonderful thing. We just couldn't afford it on the one income covering uh, the tuition and the fuel. That was back when fuel first hit $4 a gallon. The school was 2 hours away. My wife was having to take laps and drive all over the metro, and we just couldn't afford the travel. And the thing that really impressed us is that even though we had fundamental differences with the Christian academy that our kids were in, we still put every kid had to go through at least 2 years of Christian school in order to get a head start and learn how to read and the like. And that's because we wanted them to learn how to respect authority figures, and we wanted them to learn from other people. My wife needed a break from being around kids all the time, and we never intended to homeschool. We intended for our kids to be in something organized. We just weren't going to put them in the government schools. So that blog post to teach you the tips and tricks will be in the comments, and please use it. Even if you are going to use public school, there are things out there that you have never heard of that can help your kids graduate faster, that can help them graduate and already have college credits. There's a lot of stuff in education that's out there that most people don't think about because you just use the government school system. Now, to start this off, I'm tempted to start talking about the black tank on the screen, but I'm going to talk about why my wife and I didn't want to be in the government schools. Because even though we have a religion that would lend you to think that we were homesteading, anti-establishment type, believers who just want to, you know, close off from the world and raise our kids the way we want to do, that is not the case at all. We are very comfortable in society, and we don't have any kind of anti-medical things or alternative medical ideas or anything like that. We simply had a horrible experience in high school. I grew up in a trailer park in Las Vegas, Nevada, and my wife grew up in hill country of Northern California. We didn't meet each other until our early to mid 20s. I grew up and my parents were weird. My parents are overly Catholic, overly protective. We were as poor as could possibly be in a trailer park and just got picked on and bullied and uncomfortable every single day of school. Our second car was an old motor home. So if I missed the bus to go to school, my mom would drive me to school in a motorhome. It was embarrassing to say the least. My wife got picked on so much in her high school, to the point of people throwing rocks at her and trying to physically hurt her, that she worked her way through a Christian school all on her own. She did not want to be in the in that high school one more day than possible. So she went and washed the dishes and cleaned up after the kids whose parents could afford the school, so that she could work her way through a private education and not have to go be picked on every single day. And that, my friends, when people were telling us, "Oh, what do you when you pull your kids out? What about the social? Where are they going to socialize?" We don't want to lay our kids on that. But high school is an awful experience unless you're Clark Kent or Lois Lane. If you're the kid who's well off and who's been in all the sports and has got the education and the middle class or upper middle class, family, your families take a couple vacations a year, maybe they have a second home, and you're surrounded in that area, then that's a pretty good place to be and it could work out. But just think that Norman Rockwell experience that people think exists only existed in the movies. Every one of these movies, if you think about Back to the Future with Michael J. Fox, you think about they always have these kids being bullied in it. And everybody thinks they're going to be the star quarterback or they're going to be on the student council when that's really only a handful of kids. If you get out of high school and you just have a normal everyday experience, you're doing really well. I had an even more complicated thing is because in the trailer park, um, and I learned about this on accident much later in life. Well, while we were in homeschooling, there's a couple of documentaries out there. One's by Ben Stein called Expelled. The other one is called Waiting for Superman. And in both of these documentaries, they go through and explain how the government school system is set up today is how it was set up in the 50s, and it can't change. This is the big thing why you have to pull your kids out, because everybody keeps talking about throwing more money at it and changing it. They cannot change. They will not change. The only thing you can do to protect your kids from that system is to remove your kids from the system. And if enough people remove their kids from the system, another system will start. Or maybe other systems. Maybe we'll have a free market of systems. But as people, brothers and sisters, there are people whose teenage girls are getting raped in the bathroom by men pretending to be girls, and they're still sending their little girls off to those schools every day. What are you doing? How could you possibly send a kid to a school where they took a boy who wants to say he's a girl and raped a girl in a bathroom at the school, and then the administration doesn't punish the boy, they transfer him to another school in order for him to do it again? You can't send your kids to that. This doesn't have it. It's just basic decency, right? This isn't advanced theology or anything like that. You can't say, and you're not going to change this stuff from the top. It's not. It's never going to change. The administrators want to keep their jobs. They're going to do whatever the bureaucrats tell them to do, and that's why you have this increasingly insane experience in the government schools today. So what I learned about this 1950s thing is that back in the day we had factories, and you had basically two classes of people that were going to graduate from high school. Those who were going to enter the workforce and be labor. Think about the Pepsi Cola bottling company or the John Deere factory, the Caterpillar factory, the big three automakers, Lockheed, McDonnell Douglas making aircraft. That most of the people were going to graduate from high school and go work at the town factory. And those who were able to grasp more academic concepts, I don't want to say smarter, because somebody who knows how to do advanced math isn't necessarily smarter than the guy who knows how to actually bore out the cylinders of an engine and make the engine work. They're just different kinds of smart, okay? And so that's not how the government schools look at it. They look at it as the people who can do well in math and test high in math and science and reading are the leaders. And so I tested high in the seventh grade. You take this test called a Stanine test, and if you're above a certain level, they silently put you on another track. So I lived in this trailer park, and none of my friends were ever in class with me. None of the misfit poor kids that I hung out with after school were in the class with me. So do you understand that's the same experience as homeschool? At homeschool, if the neighbor kid goes off to school and he was never going to see his friend anyway until he got home from school, that's the same level of socialization. Do you understand? So I never saw my friends at school, even the different lunch periods and stuff. It was really weird. I never figured it out. It's because I was on this other track. I was always in class with the kids who were well off, had stable homes, and were very bright. And so I learned about the Electoral College. I was in advanced government, advanced everything as a kid. So but I didn't know that I was in that because I was supposed to go to college. Nobody ever closed the loop on that. And so I didn't go to college until late in life. But I've always had college level jobs for some odd reason. So there probably is something to that test that they give you. But the point was that I didn't have this network to get into class. And if you already have a friend or an acquaintance in a class, it's easier to make other friends. But I was always going to class with kids that I was never going to see unless I was in the class, and I was always poorer than them, and it was just a horrible experience. So when my wife and I got to the point where we were going to, our kids were old enough to go into school, we thought back independently of each other, not back to how our own school experiences were, and we were not going to have our kids have any risk of having the same experience as us. Even though we are the middle class people now, and we do have a stable home, and our kids would have been in that had a chance to be in that other thing, they're still going to get beat up, they're still going to get picked on. Now there's all these drugs and all this craziness about sex and gender, and it's just not a place where we were going to go. So we decided to get off the beaten path, and we went to the private school. And then when we ran out of money, actually we went way too long and went into debt because we were in denial and didn't want to break with the great experiences our kids were having. We came off of that and we went into the homeschool realm. And now we find out that now my girls both entered into community college well ahead of their 18th birthday. One is 16 and she's in her second semester already. I think she started going at 15. And we're finding out that they do it exactly as homeschool anyway. Everything's online. You have Zoom meetings, and then you have curriculum, and you do the stuff online. There's absolutely no difference between the homeschool curriculum and the college curriculum. So guess what? We've prepared our kids better for the real world than had they gone to the regular experience. And so now I want to start talking about this tank, right? Because they talked 15 minutes about what was bad about it and why we got into it, got into homeschooling, or actually got out of the government schools. But you see this black tank on the screen here. A friend of mine gave me that years ago when I was growing fruit trees. He gave me that tank to collect rainwater, so that way I could I have a little pump and I can pump water around my backyard. And I was just curious to know the volume of the tank. Didn't need to know it. But so because of the kids and we're doing math at home and whatever, I remembered pi r squared h is how you calculate the volume of a cylinder. And using that formula and my tape measure, which should be sitting around here somewhere, I came up with like 248 gallons, which is pretty darn good, right? So I have a 250-gallon tank. And why do I tell you this story? Because that is the only time in life that I can remember where I ever used any type of formula in real life. And even still, I didn't need to do that. I didn't need to know how much water was in that tank, right? And I could have figured it out other ways by using 55-gallon drums and dumping 5 of them in there, right? And so it doesn't matter. And that's what I'm getting at is that they peg so much on this math. And my kids all don't get it. It's hereditary because I didn't get it either. Even though I had to get through because I was on that higher track, I had to get through algebra 2 trig to get out of high school. I had to pass algebra, geometry, algebra 2 trig to get out of high school because I'd taken so much advanced math before I got to high school that I was running out of classes to take. And I had no idea what this stuff meant. I just memorized their formulas and spit back to them what they wanted. I had no idea what it meant. And to this day, there is no reason in a normal, regular, everyday human being's life, whether they're an executive or whether they're working at the grocery store, that you need to know how to plot an oval on graph paper. That information is useless to about 98% of society. The only people who really need to know that your aerospace engineers, your chemical engineers, your chemists, the people who are manufacturing chips for computers, those design engineers, those people are using that math on a routine basis. And that's great. And it is hard. And it is wonderful that we have it. I had to learn Boolean algebra in electronics training when I joined the Navy. I know Boolean algebra, and I've worked on electronics and in science and engineering my entire life. Never once have I had to actually use the Boolean algebra. I learned how to do gates and nands and nors and all of these different, circuitry and stuff like that. But when you get out to working on the stuff, you put your meter here, there's 12 volts, you put your meter there, there's no 12 volts. Whatever's in the middle is broken, you replace that and you move on. Being able to solder the component back on the board, the physical talent of being able to apply that is worth gold, right? And yeah, it's nice to be able to calculate the stuff out. When I in instrumentation that I worked on, did use slope and intercept, did use a lot of curve fitting because we had curvy linear, results, and we had to plot these things on graphs and the like. And so there is a place for it. I'm not putting down the math. What I am saying is that it is not the only indication of an intelligent human being. Okay? We have we focus on this math and science while our country is falling completely apart because our kids don't know history and they don't know civics. They don't understand how to pay taxes. They don't understand how to work on commission. They don't understand how to forecast an inventory. They don't get any of these actual skills in the government schools. And so my kids did. My kids got that education. That's what we talked about around our table. I told them from a very young age, there are basically four ways to get paid, okay, in life, right? You can be a wage earner. You can get paid by the hour and be an overtime eligible employee, which is a noble and great profession. That's where my son is. My son loves manual labor, and he got one of the coolest jobs on earth, and he's off doing it, and he's making a great living, and he doesn't have to worry about any of the managerial stuff whatsoever. He could focus on the task at hand, and this physical labor that requires him to think and understand RPMs and measurements, he understands it, and he does it without the academia. That's a wonderful living. It's a good way to be. The next way is salary. If you're a salaried employee, what does that mean? That means that you're basically a representative of that company who gets paid a flat fee to show up and work whatever hours are necessary and to be the buffer between the hourly people and the executive people. And that is also a wonderful way to get paid. The next way is commission. If you want to make a good living and make a lot of money, you go in to capital equipment sales, business to business, or you go into any type of business like that. You get into capital equipment sales where you get paid a base salary to cover your expenses and to cover your your health insurance and stuff like that, and you get into commission sales in business to business, and you will have a great quality of life. You will get to enjoy all the benefits of being an employee and all the rewards of being self-employed. That's the third way of getting paid. The fourth way of being paid is to be the owner of the business. And that is very stressful. It's very involved. You have to understand laws and human resources and take risks. And within those four spheres, everybody falls somewhere. So I've been teaching my kids that from day one, right? Which one of these people do you want to be? And there's pluses and minuses to every single one. And you may do different ones throughout your life. But this doesn't have anything to do with 2x minus x plus 9 equals none of that. It doesn't have anything to do with it. What these kids need to understand is how to write payroll, how to forecast hours, how to make a budget, how to understand the tax code and why your paycheck gets so much smaller when you get it, and which one of these piles you're getting back, which ones you're not. They need to understand statistical analysis and why it's okay for a poll of 600 people to represent 50,000 people. That type of math has some value to it. But beyond that, they also need to have an understanding of we the people. They need to understand how our country was founded, why our country was founded. They do need to not be hating the country, and you understand how good life is here and why it's good here. It's good here. We don't have better agriculture than Europe. We don't have better land. We have better philosophies for growing stuff, and we just have a better work ethic. And so, as you move through all this stuff, we learned a great deal of mathematics, and they just keep posting on this mathematics. If you are able to write, if you're able to read and write and be articulate, you can be the president of the United States and not even be qualified for the job. If you give a good speech, if you're a good communicator, that will get you a lot further in life than being able to do this advanced math. Because I got to tell you guys, in my life, in my career, I have managed people with these advanced degrees. And when one guy that was a customer of mine, he got a degree in a Bachelor of Science in animal physiology or something like that, and he had to take a pay cut to work in his field from working at the grocery store. So this math is great, and if you understand it and you can use it for good, that's good. But we have to get past this being the only measure of a person's intellect, because it's just not. And so to return back to this blog about the government schools and God, is that if you pull your kids out of the system, you can give them opportunities from a very young age that they wouldn't normally get until they were in their 20s. Because it doesn't take the bulk of time that people spend to go to the government school is on a bus. They get off the bus. They got to have all this time in between classes and whatnot, and they're gone 8 to 10 hours a day. When we were doing homeschooling full stop, junior high, it's 3 hours a day. They do 3 hours a day, and then they went to taekwondo, they went to gymnastics, they went to piano, they went to guitar, and then they got jobs. And because they weren't locked in that school system time frame, these kids were able to have jobs that other kids couldn't get, because all the other kids at the school were competing for jobs that you could only do between like 3:30 and 8 at night, Monday through Friday. Whereas while they're off at school, my kids are doing all those jobs 8 o'clock in the morning, 9 o'clock in the morning, and they come home and do their studies. What does that teach them? That teaches them how to be good employees in a corporation later on in life. If you're on salary and you're flying around the country and your boss needs something, you get it done in the middle of the night, they sleep in the next day. Or if you're at the airport, you boot up and get done your work, and then you get on the airplane and off you go. It teaches the kids how to do time management, how to do prioritization. It gets them out of this cookie cutter mentality. And what happens when the kids come out of government school is that they've been told where to go, what to do, what to think for their entire lives, and they get out, and now they have to do it on their own. There's this gap of time that's lost, that doesn't need to be lost. And so while everybody's hoping, Waiting on Superman is a documentary about waiting for some magical external force to come and magically fix the government schools. It's just not going to happen. And if you look at the violence, these swarming, if instead of just bullying a kid now, they get the kid on the ground and 10 or 15 other kids kick him in the head. Girls are getting raped. Boys are calling themselves girls and they calling themselves boys. And it is just, you just can't send your kids there. Just imagine for a moment that the government school is that bad part of town that you would never go to by yourself. That's what that school is now. And if we're going to turn our society around, then we have to do it one kid at a time. And so we had this pandemic, and this pandemic was a very strange period of time, but it did two enormous things for education. Is that the kids came home and the parents realized that they were just learning on a tablet. The brothers and sisters, there is no reason whatsoever for you to sit right next to somebody who's right next to somebody who's right next to somebody who are all just getting fed off a tablet. You do not need to go to a building to do that. So when they came home, they're all learning off these tablets. There's no reason to go to the building. There's no reason to even have the faculty, the overhead, the structure, the maintenance, the security. You don't have to risk a mass shooting. You can just sit home in the comfort of your own house on a Zoom meeting, consuming the same exact information, which is what we all did for our jobs. The world kept spinning as we came home and did our jobs online. Now, I've always had a remote job, so I don't even know what it's like to go into work, but maybe it's good. Who knows? People like to do it. Maybe someday I'll do that. But the other big thing that happened from the pandemic, as the kids came home and they turned on their computers, is that the parents looked at what was on the computer. Because the same time that the kids couldn't go to school, the parents weren't allowed to go to the store or go to their jobs. So everybody's stuck in at home. The parents looked over at the monitor and realized that little Timmy was being taught that he could be a Sally. And they were being taught to hate the country. They were being taught to hate each other based on their skin color. They were being taught racism. And the parents learned what was actually happening. The pandemic forced people to come to grips with the cesspool of the government system. And people are pulling their kids out. And that's what we've got to do. We've got to put a line in the sand and say, you guys don't get our kids anymore. The decision my wife and I made was that it would be better when we decided to do our homeschool thing or do our Christian, actually when we decided to pull them out of Christian school, we thought about putting them into public, and we made the decision that it would be better to raise good citizens who might not be as educated as the other kids, as long as they were good citizens. If they learned how to pick up after themselves, if they had a work ethic, if they opened the doors for women, if they looked out for the poor and the needy, and they weren't coarse, and they didn't come out tattooed to high heavens with a nose piercing and 18 different names, that so what? If you can plot an oval on a graph, but you're that messed up, how does society benefit? Because the purpose of education is to take citizens and turn them into productive citizens. And then they do it again, and they do it again. That's how you have a civilization, is for that to keep going. It's called commutations and permeations, if we want to talk about this advanced math. So I think I will close with that. This is a 30-minute, kind of a rant. Again, the link to the article on the resources for homeschooling, one of the best things we found was called co-enrollment, where if a kid is a homeschooler and in high school, they can co-enroll as at community college, and they don't even have to take a test. They could just start taking classes for a heavily discounted rate and start racking up units and learning how to go to college. Thank you so much for listening. I do hope that you will drop by First Century Christianity and check out our religious section. But for the love of God, get your kids out of those schools. Find a private school, find tutors, find homeschool, do something, but save your kids. God bless.